Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, we got a lively full house here. My name is Pam Smith, and I am the Director of San Diego County's Aging and Independent Services. Thank you. In 1932, my dad's first wife died in childbirth and left my father with 4 very young children. He was grieving. It was in the midst of the Depression. We lived in rural Idaho. They lived. I wasn't born yet. He worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. He was a farmer. He ran a dairy. He did odd jobs around, and was faced with the tragedy of losing his wife and newborn baby. My grandparents moved in. When my mother was 13 in the same area of Idaho, her mother died of asthma. My mother was the oldest of 6 kids and lived in a very rural part of the state. And her father traveled with his job with sheep. Aunt Carrie moved in. I know from stories that I heard from them how hard it was. You're going through the loss. It was difficult. It was complex. But my grandparents and Aunt Carrie kept our family together. And I think that's what we all know that families do. Without them, they could not have stayed together. They just couldn't have. Siblings would have been scattered. Who knows when you can be together. And they made it through as family units. We're here today, you know, grandparents, relative caregivers have always been a part of our society. But the numbers are growing, the issues are complex, and we need to be there to help those that step up to take care of their families. This is our first ever Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Conference and all relative caregivers. This event is really the launch at the effort that we will be doing countywide to better coordinate services, offer help, and support those of you who have stepped up in your families to take on extra responsibilities. We're here at the Jacobs Center today, but we have 4 other satellite sites out there, so I want to say hello to South Bay, East County, North Coastal, and North Inland. All are participating today. We're going to have about a 2-hour session with some great speakers, and then from there we'll break and have local workshops at each site with local providers and partners and folks to really offer the resources and information that people need. Also, lunch. So we think we've got a great day planned. But it is about the support and commending you, the grandparents, the family members that step up and are taking care of your grandchildren. You know, it's hard enough to raise your own kids, and most of us never think we're going to have to do that twice. In the last 3 years, I became a grandmother. I have 5 grandchildren that are all 3 and under. And, you know, I love them dearly, but I'm also exhausted when they go home. And I just, you know, really admire the work that you're doing, because when you're exhausted, they're still there. And we want to be here today to help you in the very important work that you're doing. We have some great partners, and I just want to mention, I'll talk more at the end. We want to thank our sponsors, First 5 San Diego, Promises to Kids, the County of San Diego, Health and Human Services, but have all offered financial support in bringing this together. Many other partners, the YMCA Kinship Center, 211 San Diego, other county departments, Grandparents Connection. It's been a phenomenal group that has come together to really say we can do better in our support of those that may need some extra help. The person that really has spearheaded this effort and launched it, though, is someone I'd like to introduce. It's Supervisor Greg Cox. Supervisor Cox is the Vice Chairman of the County Board of Supervisors and representing District 1, which is South Bay. He began his public service as an educator, but he's always been a strong advocate for the needs of children, families, and seniors. You know, I've known Supervisor Cox for over 20 years, and he's always on the right side of issues. He's very action-oriented, and it was he that led the effort and asked us to come together, and couldn't we do more in this important area. So I really want to thank you for your leadership, and I'm very pleased to introduce Supervisor Greg Cox.
Thank you very much, Pam, and I am truly honored to be here today to say really a few words of welcome and really appreciation. You are all here today because of our first Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Conference. This is the launch of what we certainly hope and expect will be a continuing effort on behalf of the County of San Diego to help grandparents like yourselves raise your grandchildren when you suddenly find yourself in that situation where they are now a part of the family that lives in your home. This is certainly a growing problem for all of us baby boomers, and I think that probably includes just about everybody in this room, except maybe some of the younger ones. As you can see from the statistics behind me, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are about 4.9 million children living with their grandparents throughout the United States. In California, the number is about 280,000 children living with their grandparents. Scoping it down more specifically here in San Diego County, we estimate that there's more than 24,000 grandparents like yourselves that have the primary responsibility for raising their own grandchildren. So you've got a lot of company. As you know, this issue transcends regional, cultural, and socioeconomical populations throughout our county. And we all know, certainly everybody in this room, but I think outside of this room, we all know of people that are grandparents that are now raising their grandchildren because of either a tragic situation or other circumstance that came about. As a father of 2 children, along with my wife, I know that children bring joy, they bring energy, they bring spirit into our home and our families. But for grandparents who may have not had children in their homes for several years, the challenges are many and can be very daunting. In today's fast-changing world, grandparents have to deal with things that they never dealt with before when they were raising their children. Things like sexual predators that prowl the internet, kids who engage in sexting, and certainly the designer drugs that have come about just over the last couple of years, last 2 years or so, bath salts and some of the other things that are out there now, spice, all these great sounding things that have tragic consequences for children. And if parents are completely out of the picture, grandparents have to learn about new school requirements, medical needs, and commonly dealt with legal issues if they become the guardians of their grandchildren. That's why I asked our County of San Diego staff, who are a great group of people, to look at ways that we can help these grandparents. And what led us to today's conference, the first of its kind in our region, was that commitment on the part of our county staff. We are here to seek broad community input to identify resources and support to assist you as grandparents as you're raising your grandchildren. And we know that, you know, we've got a document that I'll reference in just a second. We know that we've got some good resources and good information, but we know that you've got a lot of experiences that I hope that you will share today, because we probably need to add additional things that we haven't even thought about in regards to some of the challenges that you face as grandparents raising grandchildren. This is the main site for today's conference, but it's also being broadcast at 4 other satellite locations that Pam Smith just referenced. And they include a location in Chula Vista, a location in El Cajon, and also in Escondido and Vista. So we certainly want to acknowledge and thank individuals that are at those locations today for their participation and their involvement. I also want to thank the planning committee that put together this symposium. This committee has been meeting regularly over the last 6 months to identify resources, services, programs, and literature for you today. And as you came in, you saw all the booths set up by the many providers that are a part of this conference today. They've got some really great information. Finally, the members of this committee are certainly a very broad representation of the community, and they are listed on the back of the booklet that you have, the toolkit as we call it, the handbook for grandparents and other relatives raising children. I want to thank a few other partners, including 211 San Diego, the First Five Commission, Promises to Kids, the YMCA Kinship Care Program, and I especially want to thank, again, Pam Smith, the Director of our Aging and Independent Services, and her team for all the support that they put in making this conference a reality today. You'll be receiving a lot of information today. We don't want to overpower you, but we think it's a good resource in this toolkit. In addition to that, we have experts in the field that are going to be speaking to you, and I can tell you I just met all of them. They're from across the United States. This is truly a national conference in regards to the speakers you're going to be hearing this morning. And they have a lot of very good information that they're going to be sharing with you. But I also want to make sure that you are aware of two very important resources that are here today that have helped put all this together. Again, we've developed this toolkit. I can't emphasize it enough. It does answer a lot of your questions, maybe not all of them, and if they don't answer your questions, we want to know what questions you have that aren't answered in this toolkit so we can update it and expand it and improve it. And then secondly, our partners at 211 San Diego. I think they're seated over there at the table there. They have a table out in front. They have developed a web page which is full of resources and stand ready to accept your call if you need any additional assistance. On the website, you can navigate the hundreds of resources that are out there available to assist you in the services and programs that you might be eligible for, and they certainly stand ready to assist you. If you choose not to use the website, you know, it's 3 simple numbers, 211. That's all you got to do on the phone, and you can be connected with a real live operator that is there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to answer your questions and plug you into the services that you may need or that you're eligible for. And those services cover broad range: financial, energy assistance, medical, health needs, social service needs, food stamps. All the litany of programs that we have in this region can be basically connected to you through dialing 211. So again, just remember those 3 simple numbers, 211. I have to tell you in closing that this is not the end. It's truly just the beginning of what we are going to be working on as a county to try to address the needs of grandparents raising grandchildren. We know that this is a need in the community. We know that it's going to expand in the years ahead. And as a county of San Diego, we want to be there to provide you the support system, the guidance, the direction that can allow you to succeed in raising your grandchildren. I can't tell you how proud I am of each and every one of you that are here today, not only in the room here at the Jacobs Center, but in Chula Vista and El Cajon and Vista and Escondido for taking the time out of your day to be here to be a part of this program. Together, we can make a difference in both your lives and the lives of the grandchildren that you are raising. And again, I thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Cox. He's going to be here a little while this morning, then he's headed down to South Bay to our site there and join in. So thank you again. Thanks so much for your leadership. Also want to mention Danny Malgoza from his staff, who's really been key. I wanted to do a special thank you, too, to Rose House. Where's the Rose House folks? They have been a leader around in helping all the regions in supporting grandparents raising grandkids. And they've helped us down this road on what we should be doing as well. So thank you all, Lenny. I'd like to introduce next Donna Butts. Donna Butts is the Executive Director for Generations United. That is a national organization that advocates for intergenerational programs. They're located in Washington, D.C., And they do several things, but they look at doing better supports for grand families. They work with Congress, the White House. They really try to advocate on that level for better supports and help. And then they come out and work with all of us in inspiring us, sharing best practice. And really, they helped us launch all of our intergenerational programming in the community, and it's really thriving. We actually were just named one of the best intergenerational programs in America, and a lot of this has come from the work that started. So I'm very pleased to introduce Donna Butts.
Good morning. And all of you out there can say good morning too. It's great that you're here. It's just an honor to have a chance to spend a couple of minutes with you this morning, because you really are grand families. When we first did the messaging research to try to come up with the right term to call families where grandparents and other relatives are raising children, all the focus groups we did around the country, what we found is grandparents and other relatives raising children was just too long and cumbersome. Kinship care left people cold. The only person in a focus group who liked that term was a social worker. But what everybody resonated with was grand family. I live in a grand family. I live with my aunt, my uncle, my brother, my sister, my grandparents, but I'm in a grand family. So really, I salute you, because you are in grand families, and you're in a grand county. San Diego, as Pam mentioned, is one of the first 5 best intergenerational communities in the country. We just named that last week in Washington, and we're really, really excited about all the work that you do here, because you care about and you value the strength of every generation in your community, and that is so important. And the fact that you're coming together today to launch this new effort, to release the handbook, to start to talk about the supports and the strengths that the families need are so important. So I salute you, Mr. Cox, for all of your leadership, and Pam Smith and her staff are just absolutely fabulous, that you're coming together to do this. Now, we salute you, and we salute you is why we do the work that we do with policymakers, with the media, trying to change the perception and make sure that we give voice to the work that you do every day, because you give meaning to the work that we do every day. So that's why we also hold a national grand rally every couple of years, where we get thousands of grandparents that come to Washington, D.C., and they let their voices be heard. And those voices are so strong. So never, ever hesitate to talk about your family, to talk about what's great in it, and to talk about what you need. Because whether or not you know it, families like yours save this country more than $6.5 billion every year because of what you do. And you deserve respect, you deserve support, and you deserve honor for what you do. And there's one voice I wanted to share with you just briefly before I step off, and that is a gentleman that you may have heard of. His name is Kirk Franklin. Anybody ever hear of him? Kirk Franklin? Yeah? Well, you may or may not know that Kirk Franklin was born to a teenage mother. He never knew his father. The only mother he ever knew was his great aunt, Gertrude. And she stepped in and she raised him and took care of him. And when she realized that he had this musical talent, they would go out together and they would collect newspapers and cans and recycle those. And they used that money to pay for his piano lessons starting at age 4. And she believed in him, she nurtured him, she encouraged him to do something with the gift that he had. And that has led to numerous awards, including most recently, at the most recent Grammy Awards, 2 new Grammys. And what he said is, she taught me everything. She taught me how to respect people and respect myself. And that's something I'll never forget. So you make a difference every day, and we salute you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you for your leadership and advocacy. As we know, many of the issues are complex legal issues, and really working at the policy level is so important. We want you to meet someone here locally. We want to introduce you to Roosevelt Williams III. He works for City Councilman Tony Young in District 4. His great-grandfather raised him from age 13, has been an inspiration to him. Take a look.
Well, When he was 13 years old, his mother lost her job, and he called me crying because he didn't know where he was going to be staying, so I told him I'd be over to get him. And at the time, he didn't have nobody else to help him because his father was in jail. So, you know, that's how he wound up with my wife and I.
He was the only one that said, here's the way out. I'm going to get you this bus pass for you to go to school. And when he gave me the bus pass, I could have went anywhere. I could have went downtown, but I went to school because it was from his examples of being a good man.
We was married for over 65 years. We both did a lot of sacrifice between us to try to assist him to make sure that he had the things that he needed. It was kind of difficulty there for a while because of the fact that, you know, we hadn't had no children in the household for years. But I went and got him because I didn't want him winding up in jail or in some kind of trouble, which, you know, he needed guidance. We have good relationship. He's by, you know, to check on me 3 or 4 times a week. He stops by. And he's my barber. He also cuts my hair. I let him train him how to cut hair on my head. I bought him his first pair of clippers, you know, when he was learning how to cut hair.
My grandfather's integrity, his discipline, his aura, he's everything to me. I consider my great-grandfather as my best friend. I believe my great-grandfather saved my life like a seatbelt.
The main thing is to be patient. You have to have a lot of patience dealing with children today. And this is what's important. And you can't give up on them. If they need your help, just, you know, be patient. Well, I'm really proud to see him try to make something out of himself on his own. And a lot of people has called telling me how proud they are to see him, and it makes me feel good to know that he's doing something, you know, worthy.
I'd like to welcome Roosevelt Williams and his great-grandfather, Matthew Cook Sr.
I'd like to say hello to everyone that's here, and I want to thank everyone for coming out, and we love everybody.
I want to first say good morning to everyone. And I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to send a special shout out to Ms. Lamberg. And I also want to give a special thank you to the Grandparents Connection. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. I got to remember that patience. Patience, that's the thing with him. The other thing, I love the video that captures the teaching him to cut hair. Those are the kind of loving things we do in a family and care for each other. So thank you very much and for being an inspiration. I'm now very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Susan Kelly, along with Donna Butts, traveled the farthest to be here today. She joins us from Georgia State University, where she is the founder and director of Project Healthy Grandparents, a community-based research and service program that provides comprehensive services to families in which grandparents are raising their grandchildren in parent-absent homes. The vast majority of children in the program have been abused, neglected, and abandoned by their birth parents. To date, Dr. Kelly has secured more than $5.5 million in federal, state, and foundation grants for Project Healthy Grandparents. She founded the National Center on Grandparents Raising Grandchildren and served as its director from 2002 to 2006. Please welcome Dr. Susan Kelly.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is such an honor to be here with you. It's just great to look out and see so many wonderful mothers and grandfathers and aunts and uncles out here in the audience. I'd like to thank the San Diego Board of Supervisors, and particularly Supervisor Cox, for holding this conference and allowing me to be part of it, and thank Pam Smith and her staff for inviting me. I'm very impressed with the work that's going on here in San Diego. It's just very impressive to see different government agencies coming together to work collaboratively. We don't see that everywhere in the country, so really appreciate that. People often ask me how I became involved in the issue of grandparents raising grandchildren. They say, you must have been close to your grandparents. And I said, well, not really. I never met either of my grandfathers because they were deceased before I came along, and we grew up 1,000 miles away from my family. And in those days, people just didn't jump on, it was propeller planes, just didn't jump on a plane to go home every holiday to see families. So my passion came through my work in the field of child abuse and neglect, and working with families in the court system and in the hospital. I'm a registered nurse, and through my research. And although the first grandmother I met raising a grandchild was back in the 70s, and she was my age at the time, so I asked her if she minded if I asked her how old she was, because I made the assumption that she was the mother, and she was 27 years old. Raising this young child and really loving and doing a great job. Well, I really wasn't involved much with grandmothers until 20 years ago when I was doing research at the Children's Hospital in Boston with children who were exposed prenatally to substances. And I met a grandmother who told me her story. She told me about how she was a night supervisor at one of the hospitals, and she was raising her 4-year-old grandson and the newborn granddaughter, and she explained how her daughter was incarcerated. And she said, it's not so bad for the baby. She never knew her mother, but it's very hard for my 4-year-old grandson. He wakes up in the night screaming for his mother. Then she went on to say that one of the worst parts for her is her daughter had been released from prison 6 months earlier, and she hadn't heard from her. So for her to sit there and say, and I don't know if my daughter's dead or alive because her abusive boyfriend picked her up when she was released, really broke my heart. And at that point, I decided to work with grandparents raising grandchildren, first in Boston and then in Atlanta. In terms of putting this perspective, this phenomenon is certainly global. I was very fortunate to visit this village in Africa that you can see on the screen to your right. And this was a small town in Kenya near Lake Victoria. And half of the children in this one village were being raised by grandparents because they'd been orphaned by HIV/AIDS. And it was just amazing. So you can see the children in their beautiful little Catholic school uniforms and some of the sisters that educate them. Certainly it's a phenomenon in the Caribbean for similar reasons, often HIV/AIDS, sometimes substance abuse. Eastern Europe, parents leaving Eastern Europe because there aren't jobs to go to Western Europe and leaving the children with the grandparents. Similar scenario in Asia. If you look in China, there are people who go from the rural areas into the big cities for employment and leave the children with the grandparents, and then certainly in the U.S. This is one of the grand families in the rural village that we talked about. The woman in the middle who's being held up by a woman in a purple outfit is the grandmother who's responsible for those young children. We heard some of the statistics. In the U.S., 1.6 million being raised by grandparents in parent-absent households. That's why this number is a little smaller than what you saw from Supervisor Cox, because he talked about the extended family. And if we look at this, we hear a lot about children in the foster care system, don't we? In the newspaper, as we should. Well, we can see that there are 3 times as many children being raised by grandparents outside of the foster home as there are in the foster home. And then in the U.S., 1.6 6.4% of all children, 1 in 12, are being raised by grandparents. So you're certainly not alone in this, although sometimes it can feel that way. There's been a dramatic increase. If we look since 1970, 173% increase. It impacts all racial, social, and economic groups. However, those from minority and low-income families are disproportionately represented, my belief, because of societal problems and lack of access to resources. We heard about California. I'll skip over that one. If we look at what's the breakdown of race ethnicity, we see that the largest group are Caucasian grandparents raising grandchildren. Well, no surprise, that's the largest proportion in our country of all individuals. 25% are African American, 25% are Hispanic, 3% Asian, and this figure I suspect is very low, that 2% of the children 2% of children raised by grandparents are Native American. So if we compare the different households, if a child is being raised by a grandparent compared to a birth parent, they're more likely to be low income. The grandparent is less likely to have had educational opportunities as other families. The child's more likely to have a disability, and so isn't the grandparent. We know there are many reasons why grandparents are raising grandchildren, and this list is certainly not all inclusive, but these are some of the most common factors. Abandonment, often as newborns in the hospital. These babies are abandoned, and it's not unusual for a grandparent to get a call from the pediatrician or the social worker to say, your daughter gave birth, will you please come pick up this baby? And we have one grandmother in our program who did that twice, and she said, if I get another call like that, I just can't do it. I can't take one more baby home. And what do you think happened when the call did come in? She took the baby home, because the thought of that child growing up without his siblings was just not an option for her. Various forms of abuse and neglect, with neglect being most common. Substance abuse plays a large role. Mental health issues and mental health issues and substance abuse go hand in hand, don't they? Incarceration, HIV/AIDS, or other illness or injury, and certainly violence, particularly domestic violence, can play a role in grandparents raising grandchildren. And homicide. This is one of our favorite clients. This gentleman that you see on the slide, his name is Mr. Ralph Johnson. And he was by himself, single-handedly raising these 5 grandsons whom he adopted. And the significance of this is not only his great love for family. He was 82 at the time. The fact with the baseball uniforms that Mr. Johnson played for what was called then the Negro League. And what was very exciting about that is Mr. Johnson played ball with Hank Aaron. How many recognize that name? Maybe the youngest in the room won't, but Hank Aaron is a very famous baseball player who hit 755 home runs during his professional career. Well, they had worked together for a year. So we were having a program. Every year we have a luncheon to honor the grandparents in our program, and we decided to honor Mr. Johnson because we thought what he was doing was so remarkable. Despite the fact he was taking the bus 3 times a week for dialysis, he was really keeping it together for these kids. So we thought, well, we're having this luncheon at the Atlanta Braves Stadium, and maybe if we're going to honor Mr. Johnson, we could write Hank Aaron and see if he would come. Well, of course, I know nobody who knows Hank Aaron, and I had no connection to him, so I just wrote him a letter and included a photo of Mr. Johnson and the children, and said that you two were on a team together for 1 year. And guess who came to the luncheon? Hank Aaron. It was wonderful. I didn't hear from him. I thought, oh, well, he's a busy man. Everyone, when someone's famous, you can't even imagine what it would be like to have the demands on your time. And all of a sudden, I got a call from his speechwriter, and she said, well, what do you want Mr. Aaron to say? And I said, oh, does this mean he's coming? And she was like, "You idiot, why would I be calling you if he isn't coming?" But he was wonderful. He talked about how unfair it was that a great ball player like Mr. Johnson was not allowed to play in the professional leagues in his day. He talked about his role, the important role he was playing as a grandfather, raising grandchildren. And I got to be Mr. Aaron's bodyguard, because as soon as someone would come over and try to get an autograph, he would look at me. And I know he was thinking, "Susan, you promised me this wouldn't be a time where I'd have to give out a lot of signatures." So how do grandparents do this? Because of the incredible strengths that you have. One of our grandmothers said quite simply, "You don't do this without strengths." I mean, it would just be impossible. One of the things we focus on with our families is to, when sometimes it can feel overwhelming, can't it? Particularly at the beginning, is to think of other times in their lives when they have faced what at the time felt like insurmountable challenges, and to think how you got through it. And people will be able to draw on those past experiences. Certainly resiliency in our grandparents is amazing. Spirituality can be critical. The commitment that you demonstrate to your families is truly amazing. We hear a lot about the heroes in this country. The word hero is tossed around, and I clearly think that you are true heroes, and heroes as much as the men and women who served in our armed forces. So I applaud you for what you do. And please applaud yourselves. Your resourcefulness, I mean, it's not easy getting by doing this the second time around, and your self-sufficiency. So those two slides I'm going to show you have to deal with stress. And I'm going to show you two ones. I want to see which one you identify with most. I think it's stress as your stripes are falling off, or does it escalate and do you feel more like this? I'm a little stressed right now. Just turn around and leave quietly and no one will get hurt. So I'd like to talk about some of the reasons why it is such a stressful role to raise grandchildren. Certainly, pardon? The thing. That's true. The comment was the grandchildren raise us too, and that's true. We all learn from each other. Certainly social isolation is something that grandparents talk about. Sometimes grandparents feel alone. I mean, you can be in a room like this, but my situation is probably very different than the next person's. And often it's not, but that's how it can feel. Often we hear from grandparents that, you know, it's hard for me to relate. My friends my age, they really don't want little kids around when we have coffee or go shopping. And when I go to the schoolyard, the young parents, we don't connect. We don't have a lot in common. Thus, the cartoon of the kangaroo with a non-kangaroo in the pouch. Certainly, we all know how expensive raising children can be. Housing, this is a big one, isn't it? You know, you've downsized, your family's grown, maybe you're living in a 1 or 2 bedroom home or a condo, apartment, and all of a sudden there might be 2 or 3 grandkids to take in, and maybe they're teenagers, boys and girls, and you can't have them necessarily share a bedroom. So housing is a huge issue around the country for grandparents. The basics, food and clothing. I'm so glad that your commissioners here in San Diego understand these issues, because I've heard legislatures in Georgia say things like, what do you mean you want us to give money to grandparents to feed and clothe their children? This is their blood. And it's like, hello, you know, it's expensive. And then health issues. How many of you here have put your own health on the back burner because you were so busy taking care of your grandchildren? I see a lot of you shaking your heads. We'll talk about that. What we like to say to the grandparents in our program is please make your own health a priority, because you need to keep your health to be there for the grandkids. Some of the challenges you have are dealing with children who have child behavior problems, and we'll talk about this in a minute, some of the reasons why they might have behavior problems. adolescents. All I have to do is say that, and I think the word in your blood pressure, some of you probably just went up. We heard about it's a different world out there. That's what our grandparents tell us. They say, I don't know how to raise my grandkids. When I was raising my own kids, I knew what to do, but now it's illegal. And so we need new strategies. Unsafe neighborhoods. Why? Because if someone has gone from living in a 2-bedroom condo or apartment and they need to now have 4 bedrooms, they got to make the money go as far as it can, and maybe the neighborhood isn't quite as good as the one they had to relocate to. Parenting later in life can be a challenge, but there's also a lot of wisdom that you bring to the situation, a lot of life experiences. And certainly some grandparents, if they have time, grieve for the loss of their so-called golden years. Challenges with adult children. This can be so difficult on you because there are many times that the reasons you have the grandchildren are because one of your adult children, sometimes I've seen families where it's more than one, are having their own challenges. Most often it's substance abuse. And the research clearly shows us that substance abuse is often a form of self-medicating for people that have had mental health issues, often starting in high school. But it's not being identified in the schools. And when it is identified, there aren't enough services out there for mental health issues or for substance abuse treatment, which is really very distressing. I thought of a stronger word, but it's very distressing that we, in our society, that we try to act like mental health issues aren't as important as something like cancer or diabetes. Some of you have probably struggled with adult children with multiple rehab attempts. You know, that's part of the disease. I've had grandparents in my program tell me how their adult child has come and stolen from them because of substance abuse. Certainly incarceration we mentioned. Sporadic contact. This is really hard when one doesn't know if and when the birth parent is going to show up for a birthday, for a graduation, for the holidays. And then some grandparents in our program have adult children who are missing and believed to be on the street. Certainly legal issues have been alluded to today. When we first did our research with the families in Atlanta, we found that 70% had no legal relationship with their grandchild. And that is really significant. And when people are going along day to day and things are going fine, why do I need to have a legal relationship? Well, there are many reasons, and I'm glad that there are resources in that wonderful directory that talk about that. But so, in a minimum, we recommend a guardianship. You don't even need a lawyer to help you obtain that. Some grandparents go to custody. We had one great-grandmother raising 2 great-grandchildren, and the kids were finally settling in. And on a Friday afternoon, their mother got released from prison, came to the school, picked the kids up, took the kids. There was not a single thing the school could do, the police could do, or that the Child Protective Services could do because that grandmother did not have guardianship of that child. Eventually, she got the children back, but what a terrible ordeal for that grandmother and those children. We like to emphasize it's really hard to talk about, but with our families, we like to emphasize the need to do estate planning. Sometimes we hear the term will or estate, and we think, well, that's for people who have money. But it's about so many things, including who do you and your children want the children to go to if something were to happen to you. So it's a hard thing to think about, but it's important to have a plan. And certainly adoption. We've had several hundred families that have chose to adopt their grandchildren. And if that is the right scenario, it's not for everyone, but it certainly can provide some reassurance for the children as well as the grandparents as to the permanency of it. And then sometimes it'll be educational rights. that you may need legal advice. And I'll tell you what we do, because I know you're all seeing dollar signs, ching ching, when I hear the word lawyer, because the lawyers, like any professionals, can be expensive, but there are resources. So what are the grandchildren dealing with? Very often they feel abandoned. We know this goes on if their parents get divorced. Children often feel they've done something wrong. They feel abandoned by one or more of the parents. It's really difficult for the kids when the parents are in and out, and the children don't have any idea of what to expect, when to see them. The birthday comes, the mother doesn't show up. So it's really important. We work with our families when it's appropriate to set limits with the birth parents, if it's appropriate and it's a problem. Certainly the children at a minimum experience disruption in their attachments to their birth parents, and even if it's a difficult situation and they're much better off now, it still represents a major change for children. Even children as young as 2 to 4 months are attached to that birth parent. The grandchildren sometimes feel stigmatized and socially isolated, that they're the only one at school, they think, that has, quote, an older parent. When many of the children have emotional problems, we'll talk about this, and that can also impact their academic performance. So, child behavior problems. We did a study of 300 children in our program, and almost a third had what were considered elevated child behavior problems on a psychological measure. And how do children display their emotional issues is through behaviors. And so we need to avoid thinking that they're just being bad on purpose, they're being bad to get attention, they really like annoying us. That's true sometimes, but that really that they're acting out some deep issues that they're experiencing. Sometimes these behavior problems are internalizing. They're very withdrawn, they're moody, they're depressed, they're anxious, or it could be the externalizing. They're acting out, they're hitting, they're causing trouble at school. So why are children at risk? You know this, but I'll just review it. Often these behavior problems and emotional issues are linked to prior childhood trauma. One of the most significant research studies in the health field that's ever been conducted took place here in San Diego County with the Kaiser Permanente practice. And what they did a study called the ACE study, where they looked at adverse childhood experiences. And it looked at death of a parent, divorce, neglect, domestic violence in the home, a wide range of negative things that could happen to children. And they followed almost 30,000 of these individuals and looked at their health issues and found that they were much more likely to have significant health issues later on in life because of those early childhood emotional problems, and it's when they weren't addressed properly. Sometimes the behaviors may not be in the child's control, and we'll talk about this in a minute with developmental delays that the children may experience. Uncertainty, confusion on the part of the children. You may be doing everything 100% right, but they still feel confused by the situation. And they fear losing you. They do. They've lost 1 or 2 parents already for different reasons, whether it be death, inability to be a parent, and so they have a great fear of losing you. But a question that we need to continually remind ourselves and ask ourselves, where would these children be without you, their grandparents, their aunts and uncles that are raising them? Sometimes we know that their birth parents, who may love them very much, but just are not able to provide that safe and caring environment they need. Without you, some of these children might be homeless. They might be on the street with their mother or father. They might be in group homes. And most likely, they would end up in the foster care system, being raised by strangers. And do you know how often in this country, on average, a foster child moves from one family to the next every 18 months. Can you imagine? And sometimes the kids don't last in the foster care because they've been traumatized with their birth parents, and guess what? They're acting out in the foster care home, and the foster care parent may not be able to deal with it. So certainly by their living with you, you're preserving those family ties, you're preserving cultural ties to your community, important values that you hold. And most likely, if these children were in the foster care system, probably the vast majority would be separated from their siblings. Just want to give you a little, I loved the videotape that we saw, and I just want to give you some quotes from some grandchildren raised by grandparents on our program. This is from Margaret, a 10-year-old. "To my wonderful grandmother, you are my inspiration. When I was a baby, you took me in like I was one of your own. Grandma, I really appreciate all the love that you show me. I wouldn't trade you for anything in the world." And it might be hard. It might take 10 years for them to admit this is true. You don't get that type of appreciation on a daily basis. And when we had a contest, that's when these children all of a sudden decided they could verbalize and express how positive they felt for their grandparent. So I'm just going to skip for the type, and I'm going to go to this next one, and this is truly meant to be bipartisan. This is from Billy, a 15-year-old. "The president, Barack Obama, is a great man who had many obstacles in his life. He overcame all of them with his beloved grandma. The man who everyone in America is looking up to was, quote, a grandmother's boy. He, being Obama, says his grandma did so much for him, he can't explain it through words, but by his actions. I feel the same way. When I make it big, my grandma's going to be right by my side." Mentioned developmental delays. In our program, we're finding that many of the children are at risk for some developmental delays because of prenatal substance abuse. So we urge our grandparents, and we do facilitate this, that if they know that their adult daughter used drugs or alcohol during pregnancy, that when the children are really young, to go to a place like the Children's Hospital here in San Diego, and to have developmental evaluation to see if there's been any negative impact on the child, because we don't want to wait till the kids enter kindergarten to find out. So it's very important. The mother may have had inadequate prenatal care, premature. Okay. I put this slide up here. "I can only please one person per day. Today I choose me." And it's just because you are so self-sacrificing, please try to put a little bit of time each day for yourself or each week for yourself. It's so important. I know what you probably like, yeah, lady, easy for you to say, and it is easier said than done, but if you're going to be there for the long run for the kids, it's important to be able to take care of yourself, and more than anything else, you deserve it. I'll tell you a little bit about our program in Atlanta. We call it Project Healthy Grandparents. We founded it in 1995. Our goal is to enhance the well-being of families in grandparent-headed households. We use a strength-based approach, and we provide 1 year of services in the home free of charge to all of our clients. Our families, because of where the catchment area, the geographical area we serve, our families are predominantly low to middle income. They're predominantly African-American families. 73% are with the children with the grandparents through informal kinship care. In other words, these aren't children that are part of the foster care system. And sometimes the grandparents prefer it that way. So a lot of them are there because of informal arrangements amongst family members. Average age of our grandparents is 56. We've had a range anywhere from 38 to 82. What we're able to provide is that social workers visit the families in the home at least once a month. They work in whatever issues and goals the grandparents have, whether it's around housing, accessing public assistance, referrals for counseling. navigating complex social systems, childcare, any issue the grandparent would like them to work with, they work with them. Each of our families is also assigned a registered nurse who goes into the home to check on the grandparent's health, do screenings, health assessments, refer to health providers, review medications. We found one grandmother was tired all the time, and she was taking 2 different prescriptions of the same blood pressure medicine. One was generic, and one was the brand name. Well, no one explained to her this is the same drug, so she's taking them thinking it's 2 different pills. We found in our program that 25% of our grandparents are diabetic, 50% are hypertensive, and 80% have chronic illness related to obesity. We also provide support groups, and I'm often asked, Susan, if we do one thing, we don't have the money for nurses and social workers, what do you recommend? And my recommendation is always support groups. They really can be wonderful, particularly if a lot of good information is brought to the support groups. We offer parenting classes. One of my colleagues said to me, Susan, that's very arrogant of you to offer parenting classes. These are individuals who have raised children before. I said, this is what our clients tell us they want. This isn't us thinking they need to be better. This is them telling us this is what we want if they choose the topics. And we're able to provide transportation, which is really critical for so many of our families. Atlanta, it's a city, but it's spread out, and it doesn't have a good public transportation system. We talked about legal referrals. We work with Atlanta Legal Aid, and I know you've got something comparable here that can help you. We also offer early intervention services because I told you about the exposure to alcohol and drugs and how important that is. In addition to screenings, we work with our local children's hospital for comprehensive evaluations, and Medicaid, which many children are eligible for, does cover in our community those evaluations. We work getting the individual education plans and making sure the children get the services, because again, until children are in school, the school system sometimes are not really eager to provide the services that these children are legally entitled to. I won't talk about community resources because I looked at that wonderful resource guide that you received this morning. It's very comprehensive. I will just mention some of the national resources that are out there. We have the National Center of Grandparents Raising Grandchildren at Georgia State that Pam mentioned, Generations United. We heard a wonderful welcome from Donna Butler, and the information and the work that they do is phenomenal. So please, I urge you to go onto their website. You will find fabulous resources there that are always being updated. AARP has a grandparent center. How many people belong to Grandparents as Parents? GAP, anyone? Well, it was founded here in Southern California. It's based out of LA, but they've got chapters across the country. And it's Grandparents Helping Grandparents. The Brookdale Foundation is another resource, and the American Bar Association also has resources. And here's our website if you're interested in learning more. And as I finish, I would like you to please stand and give yourselves a round of applause. Please, you deserve it. A big pat on the back. And the websites too, for those of you in the remote sites, really, truly, truly deserve it. So you could tell I could go on, but we'll end here. I thank you very much. I'll be around the rest of the morning if anyone has questions. And again, thank you for allowing me to share this time with you.
So right now she's incarcerated. And so I went for guardianship of my granddaughter, and when I went down to Family Services, they helped me with the paperwork down there to get custody, and they gave me a flyer for the kinship program. they've helped me get all the services I need, that my granddaughter needs, help me how to get medical for her, how to get food, cash aid, food stamps, child care, nutrition. So it's been really, really nice that YMCA has this program to help people like me in a predicament I'm in. It's rough being a father again after, you know, that many years ago when I was bringing them up then, and, you know, to start all over again and learning new things about nutrition, services that I needed that I didn't know where to go. And the kinship program helped me find those services that I needed and helped me with the paperwork and everything.
Thank you. Two things. I want to thank Susan. Really appreciate, and they're great resources. We evolve. Our video, we're going to show a couple of these throughout, referenced our kinship, the Y kinship program. That is a program here that can help you navigate the system, kinship navigator, family navigator. So make sure you know about that and can help with those resources. They are tremendous. I'd like to introduce my next speaker. I had a chance to meet Michael last year and was so impressed. He is an author, and he joins us from Fairhope, Alabama, where he lives with his wife, Melanie, who's here with him today, too. He grew up in his grandparents' home as a result of domestic violence and tapped into his experience with that when he wrote his second novel, Slow Way Home. I had a chance to read this, and it's just a beautiful book. The lead talks about, this is from the Washington Post in reviewing, the readers may hear echoes of Harper Lee or Flannery O'Connor or even of Huck Finn. But he has his own voice and his own story, and it is full of compassion and tremendous skill. So those are words of praise. He's done a beautiful job of, while this is the novel, he drew on those experiences of living with his grandparents at a very critical time in his life. So we really appreciate that he is here. We have many of these books. There's a raffle. We're raffling many of these books as a gift. There are some, if you don't win the raffle, to purchase, and Mike will be around. But this book describes, this is the publisher's description, a young boy is torn between the grandparents he has grown to depend on and the mother he wants to love. And I think Susan talked about that. Often kids are very conflicted with that. One thing I also wanted to mention, he has been a big advocate on the issue of legal issues of grandparents, and he and Donna Butts co-authored an op-ed piece in the LA Times about that issue of kind of the no-man land that grandparents can often end up in on the legal issues. That op-ed piece was picked up across the country and is really a voice for strengthening grandparents' rights. So I'm very pleased to introduce Michael Morris.
Well, good morning. It is so great to be here today. I really mean that. I am honored because I see all of you as heroes. In fact, I'm not the only one. In this generation of Facebook, I had to post where I'm going to be today, and I had people comment, please tell them thank you. And several people commented that their parents had stepped in and helped raise their children during difficult times, or maybe they moved in with their parents, with their children under dire circumstances. So I really thank you for what you're doing. As Pam mentioned, this novel, Slow Way Home, is about a little boy in the early 1970s who's living with his grandparents after his mother leaves him at the bus station to run off with the latest man that she thinks is going to bring her happiness. And he goes to live on their farm in North Carolina, and then, of course, one day she shows back up, claiming she's rehabilitated from drugs and she wants the child back. Well, her parents, who are raising him, go to extreme measures. They go to court, they lose, they're told grandparents have no rights, that she's the mother. And instead of giving him back to this daughter who's still addicted and who they know is going to put this child in bad circumstances, the grandparents actually flee with him and run away to Florida. And they hide out under different identities. So when I tell people what this novel is about, they look at me, they try to calculate my age, they say, okay, you were a boy in the early 70s, is this your story? Are you Brandon, the little boy in Slowway Home? And I think every writer, if they're being very honest, will say that we pull from certain aspects of our lives to create and make up stories that become novels. And it's certainly the case in my life. I was in a grand family. My mother and I fled an abusive household from my biological father. She married him a month after she graduated high school. She had never worked, and he was abusive. People now who knew him will tell me he was so charming, he was such a good conversationalist, and I smile. But then they'll say, you're so much like him in that regard, and I cringe, because there's nothing about him that I remember except violence. And fortunately, when I was 5 years old, my mother took the courage and took the courageous step in leaving. But it was thanks to my grandparents that we got out. We ended up living with them, and then eventually we lived in a trailer, basically 50 feet from their back doorstep. So my grandparents were big influencers in my life. And when my mom went back to vocational school to learn secretarial skills so she could help support us, my grandparents went to work on me. They gave me a safe place to live, emotional healing, and a sense of who I am and where I come from. And I think that is one of the greatest gifts that grandparents can give us. You know, people will ask me, did you always want to be a writer? That's a common question I get. In my family, they weren't big readers. We didn't have a lot of books in the house, but they were big storytellers. Particularly my grandparents. Every evening, my grandmother's sister would come and have dinner with us, and I would sit in the hallway and listen to them tell stories about people in town that never seemed to make the newspaper. And I would just envision a movie in my mind. And then my grandfather would come in and join the conversation, and he was one of the best storytellers I have ever heard. He would sit on the edge of his easy chair and wave his hand. It was just pure magic. So in looking back and answering that question, I have to say that while my family weren't big readers, I think my gift of writing and what I'm using today was a gift that my grandparents gave me. But first and foremost, my grandparents gave me the gift of protection. Because while my mother and I fled that abusive household with my biological father, he continued to see us as possessions, as so many abusers do. We were nothing but property to him when it was all said and done. He even went to great extremes that he broke into the neighbor's garage across the street from where my grandparents lived so he could monitor our comings and goings. And as an adult now, I realize why my grandfather would patrol the house with a pistol at night. But my grandmother is the one who protected my sanity. Because as a little boy, we would nap after lunch, after these elaborate meals of fried chicken and all these good vegetables she'd cook. We would take a nap, and while we were drowsing, she would have me to list out all the people in my life who loved me. And every day, the list would grow longer. She would always add a second cousin or a great aunt, making me realize that I was loved. And even though I had been scarred by abuse, it wasn't going to dictate my future. She had an 8th grade education. But let me tell you something, that woman remains one of the wisest people I have ever known. My grandmother did that task with me to help encourage me and build me up. And as I mentioned, as a novelist, as a writer, we pull from different aspects of our lives. And I can share with you, when you read Slowway Home, you'll see that Brandon's grandmother does the exact same thing to him. So that is something that I drew upon my own experience and put into the novel. You know, as Donna mentioned, you all save taxpayers $6.5 billion a year. We're in an election year. Why aren't we hearing more about that? I can tell you that personally, I think the politicians need to be talking about that and recognizing everything you do for your children, for your grandchildren, for society at large. But let me tell you something. I think that what you're doing is basically priceless. I don't really think you can put a price tag on it. Because I can tell you that from my experience, if it hadn't been for my grandparents, I would have paid a price. And I think I would not be here today. I think my father would have ended up taking our lives. There's one incident that stands out that was kind of the catalyst for my mother making the move and getting us out of that situation. My grandparents had horses. We were out in the country at their barn, and one evening it was my grandfather, my father, and myself. I was about 5. I don't know what I did. Maybe yelled too loud, laughed too loud, knocked over a shovel. But whatever it was, it sent my father off into a fury. And he was screaming at me, and I just remember being crouched down on the sand, covering my head, trying to protect myself from getting hit. And all of a sudden, I heard a slam. And my grandfather had him pinned against the horse trailer, and he said, "Let me tell you something, don't you ever speak to him that way again." And that's when my grandfather became a hero in my eyes. He was a very hardworking man, a common man who liked to wear cowboy hats. He thought horse sense trumped book sense. He was a school bus driver, a car salesman, and eventually owned a lumber business, a logging business that was successful. But again, that night he protected me in that barn and stood up for me was the night he became a success in my eyes. Like most of grandparents raising grandchildren in this country, my grandparents were not wealthy people. They lived in a 2-bedroom cinder block house. But I can tell you that I have a rich inheritance because of them. I have a sense that I am loved, I know where I come from, and I know who I belong to as a result of that. My grandfather died last year. He lived to be 101. So we were blessed to have him for a long time. And at his funeral last June, I was standing at our family plot, and he was buried next to my grandmother, who passed away in 1986. And as I stood next to the casket, I heard the words of the minister. He was reading Bible verses to give us comfort. But it's the words from my past that comforted me. I could hear my grandfather telling me, "You're just as good as the next person. So step out there and take a chance. If God's for you, then who can be against you?" I remember my grandmother putting her arms around me and telling me, "You'll never know how much I love you." But as an adult, I do know, because they stepped up for me. They made an investment in me. And as a result, I'm here today, and I'm grateful for them. As my grandfather aged, he ended up developing macular degeneration and lost his eyesight. But he did not lose his memories. One of the last visits I had with him, he told me that he dreamed about our time as a family and that it comforted him. And I'll always remember this because he didn't know it. But a few weeks before I came to see him, I had dreamed of my time with my grandparents. I was still standing in their home. They were sitting in their easy chairs. And I could look out their front door and see that beautiful St. Augustine grass that he kept so meticulously. I could see the big azalea tree wrapping around the pine, and then I woke up. And I had the greatest sense of peace that I've had in a long time. Peace like I had when I was a little boy, living under their roof and under their protection and under their care. You know, there's a holiday in September called Grandparents' Day, and Hallmark really hasn't taken a hold of it. I don't see many cards out there. I don't see any TV ads celebrating it like we have for Father's Day and Mother's Day. But for me and the millions who are being raised by their grandparents and who were raised by their grandparents, that is a very important day. And I argue to say that for us, every day is Grandparents' Day because we know what you're doing. And as Susan mentioned, you know, if the child's young, they may not realize it now, but trust me, ladies and gentlemen, they will know it the older they get. Because that's one of the greatest gifts I carry with me today is the love of my grandparents. Now that I've shared my story, I thought I'd turn back to Brandon's story in Slow Way Home and just read to you a section of the novel in his voice. He's 10 years old, and again, it's in the early 70s, and this scene takes place as his mother, Sophie, has left him at the bus station, and she's taken off to Canada with this man that she thinks is going to bring her happiness. And she leaves her parents' phone number with Brandon and gives him instructions to call, and he's waiting for them to come pick him up. After 9 buses had pulled away, my grandparents' white Ford appeared at the curb. Nana's forehead was wrinkled with worry. The way she held onto the string of her plastic bonnet and searched the crowd, I figured she was wondering if she had recognized me at all. When she turned in my direction, her brow softened and a smile formed as if she was simply picking me up after an afternoon spent at the library. As she made her way through the crowd of servicemen, the hem of her house shift flapped around her knees. Her touch was soft to my shoulder, and she pointed towards Poppy, who was sitting in the car. He was sitting with his cap pulled down close to his pointy nose like a getaway driver about to flee a robbery. "You'll feel better when you get something in your stomach," she whispered. "Now, on the way home, I want you to study about what you'd like for me to cook for you. How about a hamburger, or maybe I fry you up a breast of chicken?" Her words hazed my mind the same way the bus exhaust blanketed the air. As we walked towards the car, her arm drew me closer to the folds of her stomach. Poppy cocked his hand forward as if we were about to head off on vacation. No words were spoken as they took me away to their farm outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. The hum of the engine and cries from a steel guitar on the radio, these were the things that filled the car. An urge tempted me to turn back around and look at that bus station one last time, but I kept my fingernails dug into the vinyl back seat and managed to win that battle. By the time we'd reached their farm, mist from the air conditioner covered the car windows. Nestled between a thicket of pines and a field blanketed with tobacco, their white farmhouse teased me like an oasis. Ancient ferns swung from chains on the front porch as easy as jewelry on a rich woman. When I was in the big claw tub later that evening, their words drifted from the kitchen and rose high above the sound of hot grease popping in a skillet. "The worst kind of trash wouldn't have done something so sorry," Nana said. "I'd skin her alive as she is here right now," Poppy added. I leaned against the cold surface of the tub and tried to picture Poppy skinning Mama with the switchblade he used to clean catfish. For the first few months at Nana and Poppy's farmhouse, whenever I went to the bathroom or got ready for bed, I'd glance at the big black phone propped on top of a Sears and Roebuck catalog. It was a carefree glance, like someone might give a penny on a busy sidewalk. I didn't want to stare too long and make Nana and Poppy think I wanted to hear from her, but the concern was short-lived anyway. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I realized there would be no goodnight call offered from Canada, that land that seemed as far away as the North Pole. By Christmas, I'd even stopped praying that God would make my mama come back at all. It was then that I let the house's smell of pine needles, mothballs, and cooking grease seep into my system. I pictured that smell running up my nose and through my blood, ironing out the nervous places as perfectly as Nana pressed the collar of my church shirt. A fresh start. Those were the words the school guidance counselor would use when talking about life on my grandparents' farm. But even then, I knew that the term deserved more than a dime store cliche. It was more than a fresh start. Life on their farm would be nothing less than a resurrection in which the past and the future are called up and transformed into perfection. Thank you so much for what you do, and I look forward to meeting you in person and signing copies of the books. Thank you again.
Right now, I'm currently taking care of 3 children. They're my brother's kids. I'm legal guardian of 5 total, and I just releasing custody back over to another 2 that were released back to my sister. So originally released 7. Well, the great thing about being a relative caregiver and the benefits for the children is that it just keeps everybody close to the family. I mean, as opposed to being with a stranger, not being involved in a different situation, having the opportunity to maybe possibly go right back into the with the family. The program helped us out a lot. They found some.
I'm going to jump in on that. These are really testimonies from folks that have worked with our YMCA Kinship Navigator to help people with all the things we've talked about today when you suddenly find yourself in this situation, or even down the road now where you are, that the resources that are here. We have tables here, places to start. Supervisor Cox talked about 211. I mean, there's a lot of places for you to start, and if that person can't help you, we'll get you to where someone can. I really want to thank Michael. Your story is so touching. I read his book. It's one of the things that I thought about. First of all, my mother used to say, "I'm going to skin you alive too." I know that term. But in the book, he talks about when he'd come home from school, his grandma always had a Pepsi for him. You know, it's just those things that are those caring, loving things that people do in the haircut. But you're just so eloquent and articulate, and thank you for sharing your story and the book. So we really appreciate you being here. Okay, we have our final speaker, and I had a chance to meet Steve Breen. You might have recognized him. He's a well-known name in San Diego. He does the editorial cartoons in the Union Tribune. But you might not know that he has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for that work. But he is also well known for speaking, his humor, and he is the creator of a nationally syndicated comic strip called Grand Avenue, which shows the unique experiences of a grandmother raising twin grandchildren. One thing that we have heard from grandparents is sometimes you have to laugh so you won't cry. And we wanted to have, as we wrap up our general session, that look at raising grandchildren and some of the funny things and some of the bright things and what Steve is doing. So I'm really proud to introduce and welcome Steve Breen.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, and I was really impressed with this beautiful facility. I've never been here before. It's gorgeous, though. So many of you have not heard a cartoonist before, and I hope that I'm funny. I'm a lot of people, when they hear that a cartoonist is going to address them, they think it's going to be like a stand-up comedian. whereas most of us are just kind of these kind of awkward, nerdy types. At least that's how I feel. And then I also feel a little bit awkward, too, after Michael's powerful talk. I don't know if I have the substance to deliver that he did. You know, my offering, Grand Avenue, is not as powerful as his book, but it's a different story. But I created Grand Avenue about 13 years ago, and I'd always wanted to do a comic strip. I grew up, like a lot of people, loving Peanuts, and I also liked some of the other ones that were popular at the time, like Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes, right? You've heard of all those. So I had recently gotten married, and I said, you know, I have my job as an editorial cartoonist, but now that I'm married, I need to start thinking about the future. And I love cartooning as an art form, but I should kind of start thinking in terms of money and making a little bit of extra money, and how can I create a comic strip that will be bought by the syndicates? So it was a little bit, you know, calculated. I was thinking, well, there's been plenty of strips about kids, like Peanuts and Calvin and Hobbes, Family Circus. So what could I do that's a little different? Strip about a nuclear family, you know, it's kind of been done. How about a strip about a grandparent raising their kids? Actually, first I thought a strip about an uncle raising 2 kids, and the syndicate said, nah, we don't like that. So how about a grandpa? They didn't really like that, so we settled on a grandmother. And I grew up in a family. My parents were together. We grew up in Orange County, California. Very Leave It to Beaver, very boring. It was a loving household. My dad worked for the government. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. It was very stable and nice. And I liked my grandparents. I loved my grandparents, but I didn't have a really close relationship with either of them, or with the 4 of them. And people would always ask, well, you do a comic strip about grandparents, so you must have been raised by your grandparents or been very close to your grandparents. And the answer was no, not really. So I didn't have a lot of grandparent material in here, you know, to draw on. And that kind of worried me, because I was drawing a strip about a grandma, and you're supposed to write what you know. So luckily, at that time, I was newly married, and I was getting to know my wife's mother. Now here, these are my kids, by the way, up here. My wife and I have 5 beautiful children. So this is my wife's mom, Pat, and she's with my 2 little girls there. I quickly saw what an amazing person she was and what an amazing grandmother she was. She lives in New Jersey, and she had 11 children. And then those kids had kids, and so now, today, she has 36 grandkids. You think you're tired out there, right? 36 grandkids. Several of the girls, several of my sister-in-laws, unfortunately got divorced, and Pat here stepped in to lend a hand, as is so common. And her daughter Patty moved in and brought her 2 kids. So I would go over and visit, and I would watch this woman tirelessly. Oh, and at the same time, she was also taking care of her mother, who was about 85 at the time. So she was she had 11 kids. She has health problems herself. She's taking care of her 85-year-old mother who has dementia. And she's also taken in her daughter and her 2 kids after a divorce. And the 2 kids were Stevie and Tricia, and they were young, probably I don't know, 5 and 3 at the time that they moved in. There was a grandfather. My father-in-law, Bud, was home, But still, a lot of the work fell on Pat. So when it came time to create this comic strip, I drew a lot of the material from my mother-in-law and her tirelessness, her dedication, and her love. And I tried to put them in Kate McFarland, the grandmother in Grand Avenue. Not only was she a very loving and hardworking grandmother, she was also a lot of fun and great sense of humor and loved basketball. And I even made Kate in the comic strip a big Knicks fan. I even modeled the tennis shoes that my mother-in-law wore on Kate. So anyway, long story short, it wasn't my grandparents, but my wife's mother that really inspired. So as I went, I quickly saw that doing a comic strip about an old woman was challenging. Even having this great model, it was a bit of a challenge. And it really helped me to hear from readers sending in stories about their own grandkids, okay? And in Grand Avenue, by the way, it's in about 150 newspapers. Some of you may have seen it. It's in the Union Tribune. It didn't become like a raging success like Garfield or Family Circus, but it did have a very loyal following of go figure, older people. And they would write and email me great ideas, great setups about situations with their grandkids. And a lot of times I would put them in the comic strip. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, that's Bud. That's Pat's husband. All right, here's one. This is little Gabby. She's one of the twins. Gabby saying, "It's freezing. How'd you talk me into this?" saying to Kate as they go on a morning stroll. "Early morning walks get the blood pumping. Your brain will be sharp the rest of the day." Too bad it wasn't sharp 30 minutes ago when I was trying to think of an excuse to get out of walking. Walking, as we know, is one of the best exercises for old people, for anybody, for that matter. Next. Here she is. She sees her laundry basket, and she says, "That's funny. I thought I brought that laundry down to the laundry room. My mind must be going." She picks it up. "Why does this weigh so much?" And boo. Maybe that prank wasn't altogether thought out. Ha ha. Okay, next one. "Gabby, come watch The Sound of Music with us." Uh-oh. "Must escape film's sappy charm. No use catchy songs, too powerful." Curse that Rodgers and Hammerstein. And then it ends with "resistance is futile." Okay, so this one, you know, it's not a knee slapper, but I put it in there because it's my mother-in-law's favorite movie, The Sound of Music, and she's always trying to get her grandkids to watch it. And they don't want to at first, but you know, after a half hour, they're into the movie, The Sound of Music. So anyway, one of the interesting things about the evolution of Grand Avenue is the look of Kate. When I first started the strip, you know, I kind of drew the stereotypical grandmother. She had glasses, and she had kind of you know, lines in her neck and gray hair in a bun. And after a year or two, I started realizing, wait a minute, I mean, people who raise their grandkids today in America, they don't look like the stereotypical, you know, old 65-year-old, 75-year-old grandma. I mean, a lot of them are young and very with it people, you know. So I kind of had to re-engineer things, and I started drawing her younger. I started taking away the lines on her neck, and I kept her glasses, but we gave her a whole new hairstyle. We got rid of the bun. With the help of my editor in New York, she kind of consulted, because women's hair for cartoonists is always difficult. I always have trouble drawing horses and women's hair. Those are the two hardest things for me to draw. I don't know why. So anyway, so we made Kate a little bit younger looking. Another change was Kate had a friend, a best friend, Judy. And Judy was this wacky best friend type, kind of, you know, every sitcom and comic strip has like a wacky, fun character to contrast with the straight man. So this friend Judy lasted about a year, but I quickly saw that I barely have enough in me to produce gags for one old lady, let alone two old ladies. So I kind of phased out Judy, and the focus kind of grew more on the relationship between Kate and her kids and the relationship between the two siblings. And that's just, you know, just how it goes, as they say, you know, write what you know. The strip now is being drawn and written by someone else. I actually, as you saw, I have 5 kids now, and I'm actually too busy to do the strip with my full-time job. So the strip is now written and drawn by Mike Thompson in Detroit. And Mike is an editorial cartoonist, and he has 2 grown daughters. So his schedule is a little lighter than mine, but he's still very busy doing it. And I act as a consultant on the strip. And it's a lot of fun, and it's very gratifying to hear feedback from readers. I just love it, and we still to this day, even though my involvement isn't what it was when we started, I still love hearing tales from grandparents around America, across the country, because, you know, it is great to see, or it is important to see when you're out there raising grandkids by yourself, to kind of to see, oh, this is something that's respected and recognized, you know, and it is, I think, something that more people are understanding how important it is, the role of grandparents in our society. I'm just happy to kind of give someone, to give people out there who are in that situation a little bit of a smile. So that's about it. Are there any questions? Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, great. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I'll repeat the question. Yeah. The question was, how did I come up with the Cadillac? And again, when I started the comic strip, I was trying to make things kind of old looking, you know, because this was a grandma, and we wanted her world to kind of have this character. So she lived in an old Victorian house, and she drove an old 1959 Cadillac. Yeah. And so I went to the library, and I got all kinds of pictures on one of those, Barrett's, is that how you pronounce it? Yeah, and I drew it very carefully from all different kinds of angles, and it's kind of become like a character itself in the strip. It's always breaking down and needing work, and the kids are always making fun of it and trying to get grandma to trade it in and get a Prius or something. Yeah, the 1959 Cadillac is a lot of fun. It takes forever to draw. It would actually be a lot easier to draw a Prius. But anyway, well, thank you very much. You are a great crowd, and I really appreciate what you do. Thank you.
I think, thank you very much. What I think we can't underestimate is the fact that he does Grand Avenue, did Grand Avenue, still involved with it, brings attention to this issue. And there's a lot of ways. You can write op-ed pieces, we can, you know, novels, we tell stories, we speak, but it's an interesting way to get out there, both to reach people and for people to become aware of the issue. And if any of you have any good ideas for stories when we break, I'm sure Steve would love to hear some elements to go through there. Okay, I want to just make a few announcements, and then we're going to close our general session. We'd like to hear from you. Make sure at every one of our sites now, including here, we have lunch, we have some workshops, You can select which workshop you'd like to go to get more specific information. We have tables full of folks with information that you can pick up and share and learn about. So it's meant to be a great resource. Make sure you get the toolkit that we put together, and if you have questions about that, we have people that can answer that. And we'd like to, if you'd like to have future information, there's a place where you can sign up and make sure you get our we do a monthly Aging and Independent Services Bulletin, and we will always be carrying information about resources, events, happenings. So please sign up for that. That's free, and it's really a lot of excellent information. And then at the breakout sessions and at the sites, you can learn more about the specific things in your communities. It's why we set this up. You know, we are a very big county. We're bigger than many states, both population and geography. So telecasting our speakers, kind of kicking off the issue, but then really being able to work with our own community, neighborhood, regional providers is very key, getting to know those folks. So I really appreciate that. It's a lot of coordinated effort. I want to again thank our committee who's pulled together a lot of the logistics from, we have daycare to food to, you know, getting all the sites set up. But mostly what we do, and I'm going to end with what I started, is to thank you. We are here to salute you, grandparents, for all the things we've talked about, have stepped up. You have become that seatbelt for your grandkids, that lifeline. You are that person that is going to give that child that love, that perspective, that confidence, and frankly, you're giving them their future. You are the glue for them. And I think a couple of things, there were so many good messages there. You may not hear that appreciation every day now, but you will hear it and you will know it. And the sacrifices that you're making, but I know there's a lot of joy in all of that as you see these kids. As I was watching all the kids come in, you know, your heart just melts when you see that. And the hand-holding and the things that are there, you know you're doing the right thing and you're doing a very important thing. But as we say, you know, in the airplane, if you have turbulence, put your own mask on first. Make sure you're taking care of your own health. They need you. Susan talked about the stress and the need for support. So please don't hesitate to ask. Seek out the help to support you. You may need, as you're dealing with issues we talk about some of the acting out of kids, we have a lot of resources to help. So let us help you and let us help these kids. We all want to raise healthy, happy children. So we're going to sign off now. Again, I want to thank all the coordination with our sites, and we're going to wrap up the general session. And so I want to say goodbye to North Coastal, North Inland, East County, and South Bay, and thank you for joining us. And we'll have an MC at each of those sites that are going to step up. And in fact, I now want to introduce someone who's going to take over and give us direction on what we're doing next here. One of our great partners in this has been San Ysidro Health Center. And they have really been leading the effort on grandparents raising grandkids and have connected us with many there. And Elizabeth Bustos is here. She has been active in our work group. They're leading a lot of things. They're doing a lot of innovative things. She has been a remarkable partner in helping us move forward. So she'll now direct us on what we're doing in next steps here. So Elizabeth, thank you very much.